Okay, I think we can start. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to rather chilly and windy Eastern Cape. My name is Paul Cowley. I'll be chairing this webinar session today, which will be presented by Taryn Murray. Taran has a long history in fish movement studies. She did her master's and her PhD on fish movements and is currently employed at SAIAB as the data scientist of the Acoustic Tracking Array Platform. Her talk today is going to outline the history of this platform, and I'm sure she's going to reveal some interesting history as well as some facts and figures about this national marine platform that focuses on tracking animal movements around our coastline. Before Taran starts, just a couple of house rules. So you guys are welcome to use the Q&A function to pose questions to Taran, which he will then answer at the end of the presentation. But you can also hold back your questions, and if you want to do live questioning at the end of the presentation, we can also do that. I think that's about it. So over to Taran. Thank you very much, everybody.
Great, thanks very much, Paul. Morning, everyone. This is my first ever Zoom conference type talk, so I hope it do it justice. Technology is quite an amazing thing that we're all still able to connect, even though we are all over the country now. So yeah, the upside about this format is that we have people joining from all over the place. I saw Judy Mann there in Durban, so hey everyone. Thanks for joining us. Okay, let's talk all things ATAP. So why do we need to study fish movement? Well, some interesting information is that the recreational sector, the fishing sector in South Africa, is actually the single biggest recreational activity in the country. So it's bigger than rugby, it's bigger than soccer, it's bigger than cricket, all together combined. So it's a huge recreational activity. It's also economically important, job creation and those kind of things. And there's huge capital investment in these fishing sectors. You just have to look around, go to a little harbor, look at the boats, look at the fishing tackle, look at the rods, look at the bait. So all of this is bringing in money. But the problem with a recreational sector where you've got so many people fishing, and even though they are with a license allowed to keep fish, add up all that effort together and you actually have quite a lot of fish potentially coming out of the water. So to try and put this message across, or to lay it to you using some species as an example, you just think of a couple of the estuary dependent species like your Dusky Cub, your white steenbras, your leervis and your spotted Granta. Now all of these animals through time and various fishing effort are in pretty bad state at the moment. A couple of the stocks are collapsed, like the cod, the steenbras and the leeries, and the spotted Granta are considered to be overexploited. Current management regulations include things like size limits and bag limits, where your size limits accounts for a maximum size that you, a minimum size that you're allowed to keep a fish. So for example, leervis need to have a maximum size limit total length of 70 centimeters, and you're allowed to keep 2 fish per person per day. However, these management regulations have been relatively insufficient and a lot of the stocks are struggling for it. So this is where movement information comes into the picture. Why is movement information important? To try and explain it simply, let's just think about things like marine protected areas. Everybody is quite familiar with this term, and essentially what it is if you look at a species that is resident, which means it sticks to one area, it lives there for pretty much the majority of its whole life, and it's in one place year round. If you pop a marine protected area around that area that a species is resident, it is pretty protected. But what about species that migrate, where they might feed in some places in summer and maybe migrate to other places in winter? If you had to put that same area, like you would for your resident species, you're affording no protection at all. Where if you know that movement, you know that you need 2 protected areas. So this is kind of why the movement information is important. So you can start thinking about things like this and providing really important information for management of these species. Okay, so acoustic telemetry is a process, and what is essentially involved. So the basics of it, you need a receiver, which is that red thing over there, and you need a transmitter or a tag. And now these tags are actually quite amazing at the moment. You get teeny tiny little ones, which have a very short lifespan, but can go into really small juvenile fish, or you can get bigger ones, which are, let's call it about 5-6 centimeters long. And they can go for up to 10 years. So you can monitor an animal for up to 10 years, which is absolutely incredible. And you can essentially cover that entire lifespan of that animal and get a really nice picture of their movement history. And how it works, if you think about it, the tag is like a cell phone, and your receiver is like a cell phone tower. And what happens is that the two need to talk to each other to communicate. So you put your tag in or on an animal, you then let it go, and it swims around in rivers or estuaries or in the sea. And the transmitter then gives out gives out signals, which are then picked up by a receiver. And the receiver then records the date, the time, and the unique ID code of that animal. So you know exactly where an animal was and when it was there and which animal was there. So by piecing together this movement information, you can get a really good understanding of where an animal is moving for most of the time. So telemetry in South Africa began with relatively isolated studies, predominantly focused on one species alone. So you had some good work going on, but it was just very isolated. In the beginning, there was a single fish, a single species, and a single estuary. And this is the story of Walter, the Dusky Cub. He was a large cub, he or she was a large cub that was tagged in the West Clanamonda estuary and was monitored manually. So it means you don't have the receiver in the water, you actually go around and track that animal, was monitored in the West Clanamonda estuary for a period of time. And that was essentially the beginning of telemetry in the country. This slowly moved on to many fish with 2 species in one estuary. An example of this was a study done in the Great Fish Estuary on the Dusky Cub and spotted Granta. And the reason these 2 species were selected was because there's quite a substantial subsistence fishery in this estuary, or on this estuary. So it was important to understand the movement behavior of these 2 species. This eventually became many fish with many species and many estuaries, where your receiver network slowly started growing as a couple of students came in as well. And you could start seeing the degree to which these animals were actually moving. So to take it further, at SAMS, which is a South African Marine Science Symposium, which is a conference that is held every 3rd year, there was a workshop, a biotelemetry workshop at the SAMS conference, and there was discussion to create a biotelemetry research group, which allowed for better communication of this kind of research happening in the country. It was trying to foster broader collaboration and to essentially coordinate research activities, so all the telemetry research activities in the country. Then when Paul went to the 7th conference on fish telemetry in Denmark in 2007, there was a special workshop that was held by a couple of guys from the States, and they were looking at promoting or trying to grow the idea of these large-scale acoustic telemetry networks and to try and foster this broader collaboration and just different research groups working together. So they had already set up a network that was called the Pacific Ocean Shelf Tracking Project, or POST. And at this workshop, it was kind of like, well, what do you guys think about creating a larger network? Is there potential for creating networks in various countries which could essentially lead to a global network? And this was basically the birth, if you can put it that way, of the Ocean Tracking Network, which is a Canadian-based project, but they provide equipment all over the globe. And Paul, I was chatting to Paul about this yesterday, and he said that one of the guys said to him, well, what about you? What would you do? He said, oh, well, we're in the perfect situation for it. Southern tip of Africa, you know, we really are in a good position to have a network in South Africa. So this sparked discussions with Fred Warski, who is the current CEO of the Ocean Tracking Network. And the thought was for them to provide us with equipment, and initially we wanted to place receivers in sheltered bays along the coastline, like False Bay, Mossel Bay, Algoa Bay, and then a couple of others around important points like Port Alfred, Port St. John's, Allowal Shoal, and Jessa Point. And this was essentially to assess inter-ocean movements, to have these receivers placed in places that already had existing research that was being undertaken in them. The bays were selected because there was less risk due to equipment loss, because bays are generally more sheltered, so you don't have that rough coastline. South Africa has an infamously rough coastline, so the chances of equipment going missing would be lower in bays. They are more easily accessible because generally all the bays have harbors associated with them, and there is better migration monitoring because are these animals going into these sheltered bays at some point in time along migration routes? So the original plan was to use these bulky things called VR3s, and that was actually scrapped, and the little skinnier VR2Ws were chosen because they're just easier to be managed, easier to maneuver, easier to deploy. So the original idea was scrapped, and 120 VR2Ws found their way to South Africa. And the Acoustic Tracking Array Platform was officially launched on the 1st of August 2011, and our first ever official ATAP deployment went into Algoa Bay in November 2011, where 20 receivers were positioned off Bird Island. So let's talk more about this awesome platform, or ATAP. So there are a lot of other acoustic receiver networks or large-scale networks around the country, around the globe, and I won't list them all, but you can see all of them over there. A couple in the States, in Canada, and the Europeans are coming on with their own network. The Australians have theirs. So what about South Africa? What about us? Oh, as I mentioned, OTN has a couple of quite extensive, they call them partners throughout the globe as well. So they sort of dotted all over. What about us? What about us here in South Africa? Why was it important for us to create our own network? So as I mentioned earlier, Paul said that we lie in the perfect position. We're in the southern tip of Africa. We have two oceans that border our coastline. We've got the Atlantic Ocean on the west coast and the Indian Ocean on the east coast, which also have their own currents, the Benguela current, the cold current coming up from the south, flowing to the equator, and the warm Agulhas current flowing down along the east coast of the country. This essentially gives rise to three biogeographic regions: the cool temperate, warm temperate, and subtropical. And each of these regions has their own level of endemicity and own species diversity, but we are a very high diversity area, and a lot of these areas have a high endemism value as well, where a lot of species are found nowhere else in the world. We also have a significant number of estuaries dotted along the coastline. And most importantly, we probably have the greatest migration event known to the planet happening along our east coast. And everyone will know it as the Sardine Run. So we sit in the perfect position to just create this natural lab in which we can study all this amazing movement information. So this is what the current network looks like, with the yellow dots representing marine receivers and red dots representing estuarine receivers. And the aim of ATAP essentially is to support studies on a range of ecological and management related topics on species of conservation importance or fisheries importance. The current network stretches from the Berg Estuary in the Western Cape all the way to Ponta da Ora at the South Africa's southern Mozambique border. And the current network also comprises approximately 220 stations. This obviously fluctuates depending on specific projects that are taking place at a given time. And sometimes an area might have too many receivers, and we just kind of take out some after assessing the information that we gain from them. So it is a largely fluctuating network, but we more or less stick around 200 receivers. So we can have receivers in both the estuaries. So the estuaries consist of these large cement blocks where a receiver is placed or secured in a PVC pipe and then placed in the water. And as you can see from the video, we get to swim around in very turbid estuaries, dirty water, which is always great, nice to get nice and muddy. And then we also have receivers placed at sea. So you can either have shallow receivers, which you can see are being attended to by scuba divers, but then our deeper receivers have to be moored and deployed using an acoustic release. So as you can see, we've got a heavy mooring going down into the water, and we've got an acoustic release attached to the receiver, which will then come back when we interrogate it, and it'll come back to the surface, and we can get our information and secure our data, which is always the most important thing. Our team is relatively small. We're a 4-man squad. We've got our boss, the leader, the manager, Paul Cowley. We've got our ever trusty instrument technician, who's really been fundamental in maintaining the running of ATAP during this COVID period. So he's really been doing a lot of work, and we can always thank Matt for his really great work. Then we've got our other technician, Willie. He kind of rigs the equipment for us and makes sure that everything's clean and puts it all together. So his role is crucial in maintaining ATAP. And then you've got me. That is a picture from a very long time ago, and when I still got into the field. I miss it, but yeah, we'll get there eventually. And we have many other collaborating deployment partners, which literally without them, we would not be able to function this platform. So we cannot thank our partners enough. Their work never goes unnoticed. A lot of the time they use their own resources, their own equipment to go out for us. So yeah, this collaboration is absolutely key, and without them, we really wouldn't have the network that we have today. So thank you very much to all our collaborating deployment partners. So every now and then we manage to venture out of the office, because it seems like we've been very office bound of late, and we actually managed to catch a fish or two. And yeah, it's always quite nice to be able to get out and to interact with the anglers. Often a lot of the animals, the larger animals like the sharks and the rays, fishing competitions are actually a great source of animals, because you've got about 100 fishermen fishing at any given time with how many rods in the water. So it always provides a great opportunity for us to be able to tag at those events, and just a nice opportunity for the public to engage and see what's actually being done. So as of last night, we have tagged 48 species, and over 1,500 animals have been tagged. Not all those animals, not all the tags are currently active. A lot of them have expired, but to date, over 1,500 animals have been tagged, which is a really great feat. So as you can see, we've got a steady increase of animals over time, and this curve will probably just carry on climbing up, which is really great. This is a breakdown of the different species tagged and the number of each of those species tagged. As you can see, we've got some lonely penguins right on the left over there. Those tags have all expired, and I don't think we actually ever got any detections of them, unfortunately. We've got a whole bunch of fish species, including black mussel cracker, dusky cub, learfish, potato bass. The red Roman tags have also expired. That was a study that took place last year or the year before. Then we've got our stingrays, blue stingrays, diamond rays, duckbill rays, a whole suite of sharks. The sharks by far surpass all the other animals in terms of species and number tagged. As you can see, we've got a massive spike of white sharks over there right on the end, along with ragged-tooth sharks, seven-gill sharks, and bronze whalers. But we've got some other smaller guys, like our lesser guitar shark. We've got a single lonely lesser guitar shark, which was tagged last year. And recently this year, which was a really great ad, was a couple of turtles that were released from Bayworld, I think. Paul, you'll have to correct me on that one. But yeah, we've got some green turtles, hawksbill turtles, and loggerhead turtles. So it's great to be able to grow our range of species tagged as well as the essential animal group tagged. So if we break it down, just to try and put what species are being tagged in a conservation perspective. You know, why tag these animals? What's important? So I mentioned that there were some that were important from a conservation perspective and some that were important from a fisheries perspective. So what is the breakdown of animals? So this is all the animals combined. It's not broken down into each of the groups. But as you can see, your red, your orange, and your yellow, those are all threatened categories: critically endangered, endangered, and your vulnerable species. And over 56% of the species monitored by the ATAP are threatened, which is actually quite scary. But this just highlights the importance and the need for this information. So it's nice to be able to contribute something, you know, crucial hard evidence or data for what's the word I'm looking for improved management of these animals. There are a couple of data deficient species as well, which is also great to provide evidence for, data for. A couple of the stingrays fall into this group, so because not much is actually known about them. So yeah, again, really important information. Now, one of the additional pros of telemetry data is the recapture data that comes associated with this. So one of the main things that we do to our transmitters is to stick on a bright yellow reward tag. So it's got a Paul's cell phone number and an email address that people can get hold of us. And we just try and make it obvious so that people see it and go, "Ooh, okay, you know, let's check it out. Let's phone, let's see what this is," because a lot of the time, many people are not really sure what it even is. But I often use this example, and I apologize to those that have seen this before, but it just absolutely drives home the importance of this recapture information. So this was actually an animal that I tagged during my PhD in 2013. It was just over 30 centimeters fork length. So I mean, we're talking like a ruler length here. And this animal was caught in the Kawi estuary, where I had 20 animals that were tagged over there. And of these 20, 33% were recaptured. So that's quite a lot of animals tagged for a relatively short study period as well. So in terms of a timeline, this animal was tagged on the 15th of January. It was 30 centimeters. We know that because we measured it. The tag expired on the 11th of November, but we know that it stayed in the estuary the whole time and didn't take sea trips, because in the Kawi we had tons and tons of receivers that were recording the movements of this animal. So it didn't go anywhere. It lived in the Kawi the whole time. Then on the 3rd of May, 2014, we got called that the fish had unfortunately been killed, which is, you know, if guys got a fishing license, fine. But the fish had been killed. But when we got the tag back, we got a dart tag with it, and we don't dart tag our animals because it's just additional stress on that animal. So we're just thinking, scratching our heads, where did this dart tag come from? And it was a dart tag belonging to ORI, and ORI, the Oceanographic Research Institute, runs their own tagging program called the Oceanographic Research Institute Cooperative Fish Tagging Project. Mouthful. But yeah, essentially anglers along the coastline, volunteer anglers, can dart tag an animal, and yeah, you get some really cool information from that as well. So this animal, we got a tag and we got a dart tag. So we contacted Ori and we said, "Hey guys, what's up? We've got this dart tag. Do you know any information about it?" And it turns out that this animal was tagged with a dart tag on the 14th of February, 2014. Also in the Kawi estuary, and was 52 centimeters fork length. So it had grown quite a bit in a year. But interestingly, they also had a recapture on it on the 31st of March, 2014. So a month later, the fish got re-caught again. This is literally the little boy that caught the fish. So this is like the fish that is photographed in the photo, or has been in the photo. And this little guy recaptured the fish, let it go again, and then it was killed. So in this animal's life, it was caught 4 times, recaptured 3 times, tagged twice, and killed once, obviously only killed once. But the take-home message is it never had a chance to breed, and it wasn't even the legal size. So it just blows your mind that you can get this kind of information from something like a little tag or knowing when an animal was tagged. So yeah, just really some great recapture information coming out as well. Now, obviously, with any platform or any field work or anything, you can definitely get a couple of awkward prerequisites. And in our case, you sometimes need matching wetsuits. Sometimes you just have to lounge around on a beach waiting for some animals to come out the water so that you can tag them. Or you can just go scrounging around in the mud and get nice and dirty, which is always fun. Or you can undertake the shallowest scuba dive known to man in an estuary with probably about 30 centimeters of water available. So it always keeps you on your toes. And you get a whole bunch of other things like non-responsive toddlers, which nothing makes you feel quite as embarrassed as a toddler that doesn't respond to anything. Yeah, working next door to generators and going for photo shoots that are required, where you need some photos required for some reporting purposes. There's also some astounding problems that we've come across. And the first one, which I think we were aware of it, but sometimes the extent of the problem was unexpected. The bottom left picture is a UTR string, so a long-term temperature string that came out of the water at Mossel Bay. This thing was basically a mussel raft. So it came up completely inundated with mussels. So biofouling has really been an issue, but we found that reducing the soak time of the receivers, so they used to be in the water for a year, but now we've cut it back down to 6 months, has helped a lot. It is amazing how quickly tiny little animals are able to what's the word on pioneer, but settle on a piece of equipment and just take hold of it. So yeah, biofouling was quite an issue. We've had a couple of run-ins with a boat engine, boat motors. Top left was unfortunately a unit that came up from Gansbaai. Thank goodness the piece of instrument that you see broken there is an acoustic release and isn't the receiver. So the data was still intact from that deployment, and a receiver is replaceable. I mean, the release is replaceable, a receiver with the data isn't. So yeah, rather the release than the receiver. We've had, in the middle left, we've actually had a tag come back that was completely cut in half by a bandsaw. And this specific tag actually belonged to a learfish. So unfortunately, that can only mean that it was cut and was maybe being sliced for fillets or something, but straight through the tag. So yeah, needless to say, a piece of sticky tape isn't going to quite help us there fix that tag again. So that tag is completely done. And we even had Alison Koch who works at Sandparks now, and she's affiliated with Shark Spotters, actually got hold of us and said that somebody was selling a receiver on Gumtree. So as you can see, that is the legitimate the advert, and they were selling it for a whole 350 Rand. So if ever you see a receiver for 350 Rand, please buy it. I will buy it from you for like 500 Rand. I'm happy to do that from you. But yeah, it's unbelievable what some of the problems we've just encountered. But no matter what the problems are, or the boring, behind desk work or anything, we've really been blessed to be able to go to these beautiful areas. Some of the most kind of remote areas on the planet, Struisbaai, Cape Agulhas, various estuaries up the East Coast, and Tentu estuary. I mean, you couldn't actually ask for a better job if you wanted to. There's also it's also always fun amusing the amazing public, because yeah, it's just important to get this information out when you get paid with taxpayers' money. It's important to communicate with people and find out, you know, what are you interested? This is what we do. What can, you know, how can you help and everything. So we have often participated in science festivals, which unfortunately took a bit of a backlog, obviously due to COVID, but hopefully we'll get back there eventually. We've even done some radio interviews. Yeah, we've always on social media. Please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We've SAIAB as a YouTube channel, so there's always that avenue as well. But yeah, it's always great to hear what the public has to say, and I would be absolutely thrilled to hear any suggestions or anything that you have with regards to that. So just to kind of sum it up, ATAP is a really important platform. I'm assuming my passion and enthusiasm is coming across because I just feel absolutely lucky to be able to work with this incredible platform. And what it's done in terms of telemetry is it's really put South Africa on the map. We actually were contacted the other day by a researcher in Norway who is putting together a paper on examples from global networks, and they actually contacted us and said it would be great if we could have an example from South Africa. So it's nice to know that we are being considered, we are being heard, we are being approached for things like this. So it really makes you feel good that the work we're doing is relevant on a global scale as well. ATAP also increases collaboration between tracking researchers in the country. So we can be put in touch with new researchers, with upcoming researchers, early career researchers, anybody who wants to do telemetry research in the country. Please get hold of us. We are always willing to help. There is equipment that you're able to loan. Just please get hold of us. We won't know any different if you don't get in touch. So please do that. Yeah, we can also just provide information for improved management, as I mentioned earlier, identify factors triggering movements like changes in environmental factors. This is important for climate change research. So it's important to kind of keep those things in the back of the mind when you're undertaking any kind of movement study. And it also provides you with a better understanding of shared fishery stocks. So is an animal kind of sticking to one place, or do they move? Are they more mobile than initially thought? So it's always nice to keep these things in mind. But yeah, essentially ATAP is relevant, it's beneficial, and it's sustainable. So yeah, it's just a really great platform. And I encourage anybody who is wanting to undertake fish research to please get hold of us. We are always willing to assist. I must admit that I stole this from a researcher in Canada. Her name's Natalie Sapinka, and she essentially had that humans were storytellers, and you and me are humans, and scientists are you and me. But by a deduction of basic maths, we can cancel out certain things, which leaves scientists as storytellers. So I'm hoping that you enjoyed the story that I told you today, and I would happily welcome any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Taran. I see there's another little use of the acronym. Thank you, Mandy. And maybe I can add another one. I think I will say, thanks to all the attentive participants, just to keep to that theme. I see there are a couple of questions. Maybe what we'll do is start with the chat questions. Oh, sorry, there was a question here. How deep can the receivers be deployed? Because it would be interesting to also increase the monitoring from inshore to offshore, the pelagic movements.
Yeah, thanks, Francesca. Yeah, some of our receivers don't go deeper than, I think, Paul, you might be able to correct me. I think about 80 meters is roughly our deepest. We had some at about 90, but I think they can go up to about 200 or not. I'm not 100% sure off the top of my head. You know, sort of the south coast of South Africa would be quite difficult to get them very deep because the Agulhas Bank stretches out so far out. But on the east coast, where you've got the what's it called? The shelf that just drops off. I mean, it would be quite interesting to include receivers or have receivers up there. The problem is that a lot of our animals, the animals that we monitor, are very coastal species. So you could be having a receiver that's quite far offshore or in deeper water, but nothing actually gets detected there. And I mean, the absence of an animal is data in itself, but for us, I think it makes sense to keep things a little more coastal where those animals are specifically moving.
Thank you, Taran. And there were also some questions on the Q&A. Very interesting one. Is there a way to also monitor the movement of larvae, or is this still a technological issue?
Oh, I mean, larvae are like this big. So yeah, I don't quite think a tag is there just yet. I think I've read a couple of papers on sort of dispersal studies, and I can't remember what they have in the water, but I think it's almost like sensors that they kind of release and then it kind of goes around. So I suppose you could try and do something like that, but yeah, to try and tag a larvae, I don't think is quite doable just yet.
Yeah, I think the battery is the major limitation for the acoustic telemetry stuff at the moment. In the terrestrial environment, they're doing some amazing things with radio telemetry. Okay, Carla had another question around, again, smaller fish. What is the lifespan of the mini tags for juvenile fish?
So Carla, they're coming out, the company that we generally buy tags through, Innovasea, they've come out with V3s, which are the smallest tags they've ever made. But the smaller you go, the lower the lifespan is. So that tag would probably have a lifespan, I would just guess, about a month at most, because the little tags that we've currently got for a PhD student are V5s, and they only go for 3 months. So, and they're like quite a bit bigger than the little V3s. So yeah, you're probably looking at a max of perhaps a month. And then as for juvenile specific arrays, besides some estuary deployments, probably not. A lot of the species that we monitor are dependent on estuaries, specifically the fish species. So if you had to increase your listening power in estuaries that you perhaps were interested in, then you probably would be able to pick them up. Or really shallow inshore areas, then that could be a possibility as well. But the only two estuaries that are fairly monitored at the moment are the Cowie and the Breda. They've got more than one receiver in the estuary. All the others generally have a single estuary, a single receiver in them.
Okay, Kaylee says, well done, Taran, great talk. Bishan also said a lovely talk. Yeah, here's an interesting one. He says, if I'm doing work on a specific species or know friends who are working on different species, how can we, oops, it disappeared. How can we get ATAP involved in tagging some of these animals?
Sorry, Paul, I'm just trying to find the question.
Yeah, it was scrolling up and down.
Sorry, can you just repeat it? I can't find it.
So maybe I can just answer. Yeah, Bishan,
yeah,
it's not up to us to really decide on tagging. We welcome anybody to join in and tag animals. We maintain the research platform, and we essentially share the data with the tag owner. So whoever buys the tags, tags the fish, the data belongs to them. We just the vehicle to collect the data for the researchers. But if you do have any interest in doing something, please get hold of Taran and myself. We're always open to discussions on tagging new species and doing new work with new partners. So please get hold of us.
Oh, there. Thank you, Brashan. Yeah, thank you. Gavin, to answer your question, Gavin asked if are the global networks compatible? For the most part, yes. Many of the networks use the same equipment in Innovasea. But there are some problems, not problems cropping up, but just potential barriers to complete collaboration where all the tags have specific codes, and these codes were able to be picked up by all the equipment, irrespective of the manufacturer. Innovacy has encrypted those codes now, which cannot be uncrypted, decrypted, whatever the correct prefix is, by other manufacturers. So you now have an issue where only Innovacy tags can only pick up receivers can only pick up the tags. So there is some contention about that at the moment, but I think some of the networks are trying to work on a way forward. But yes, there was an example of a white shark that was detected. Where was it tagged? Paul was tagged in South Africa but moved to Australia, or vice versa. So yeah, as long as equipment is compatible, it's fine. A fish can travel around the world and it'll be picked up.
Okay, Kaylee's also got a very interesting question there, and this applies to marines in a sort of marine spatial planning context, and it is already happening. It's looking at things like applying an index to this sort of data, like Hotspot index, where we could then rank sites, areas based on their importance for animal movement and or residency.
Yeah, Kaylee, Dr. Ryan Daly at Ori actually did something fairly similar to this, looking at tiger sharks along the east coast, so KZN Way, southern Mozambique. So yeah, he actually used this information. I think it was it telemetry or satellite stuff, but he linked up this movement to these sort of hotspot areas and assigned a relative importance or a percentage of protection for these animals along the stretch of coastline. So there is definitely scope for it. It's just to, I think, figure out a way to incorporate all the information together, and you would have to include or consider things like life history characteristics, or life history stage. So it is definitely something that could be incorporated. You just have to think carefully about how to incorporate all of that information.
See, there's a question from Jessica Glass. Thanks, Jessica. And it's about the possibility of expanding the receiver network up the east coast of Africa to Mozambique, Tanzania, and or Kenya.
Growing a network is always great. It's just finding the collaborating deployment partners, because that is essentially the factor that can hold you back. I mean, it would actually be an amazing field trip or road trip for us, but it's actually just not that feasible to try and expand up that way. So if you could find somebody to do that to be involved in that capacity, that would be amazing. I think we're not necessarily allowed to do too much stuff out of the country, but it's not to say that you couldn't set up partnerships to be able to do something like that.
I think the important thing here is like all linked to the ocean tracking network. So we're all partners of a global network of researchers. And in fact, there is already quite a bit of research going on in Mozambique, and we collaborate with them, but it's not essentially part of our array or our network. So wherever these other networks get established, we share the metadata. So they're aware of the animals and ID codes of our tags, and we are aware of the animals that they tag. So if the fish are moving between these networks or arrays along the coastline, we do notify each other. And in fact, we've just had put together a little piece on an amazing movement of a tiger shark that was tagged in Reunion. So they had a receiver network there, and the guys were tagging some sharks there, and they did send us their metadata, and that shark swam into South African waters, and we could identify which one it was and send the people the data. So I think that's how we link up to expand the scope, the spatial scope of our network. Okay, so what happens when a small fish with a tag gets eaten by a larger fish, Taran?
So the behavior, for one, will vastly change. So if, for example, we actually think this happened to one of our previous master students, Gareth Grant, who was studying Cape Stumpnose, which are tiny little, well, they can get big, but he tagged relatively small ones in the Cowie estuary. And he actually thinks that one might have been eaten by a leofus because it suddenly went from being fairly resident or sticking to one area for most of the time and suddenly just bolted up the estuary and then bolted back down the estuary, and we're going, I don't think this is possible. So we actually think that that fish was eaten, but yeah, they eventually passed the tags. So there's been a couple of other studies where seals have eaten animals, especially like a fish species that maybe goes up and down in the water column, and then suddenly it's at the top and then just disappears. So yeah, it will still be detected through the larger animal, but the behavior should be vastly different. So that's how you'll be able to pick up on whether an animal has potentially been eaten or not.
Next question coming from Judy, I guess, or no, from Bruce via Judy, is would there be any purpose of having mobile receivers attached to a vessel?
Yeah, Judy, we are actually have an honours student that's busy looking at some information on this from Mossel Bay that we've been collecting over the years. So a receiver was positioned on the bottom of Enrico Gennari's research vessel in Mossel Bay, and we had a little GPS logger that logged the track of the boat every single time it went out. And then you can kind of match up the log time to the detections on the receiver and then kind of piece it together from there. And our honours student has just kind of started on this stuff, but was having a look at it the other day, and it's definitely providing some amazing additional information where some animals that weren't detected on the passive array at all in Mossel Bay were detected on the boat receiver. So there is definitely scope for something like that. You just have to account for stationary periods or put it on boats where you know that the boat will be still for a while, because with the boat moving and the receiver running kind of through noise, it'll just be too noisy to probably pick up a fish. So something like a dive boat would actually be quite amazing, because you'd go out, they'd be stationary for X period of time, you know that they'd be there, and then you can collect detections and then they go again. So there is scope for it.
That's an interesting one. Are there any legal implications for individuals that capture these animals and then sell the tags or the receivers that are not their personal property?
I wish. No, yeah, I mean, nobody is legally obliged to even report that they've found a tag. We just rely on pure curiosity for them to to get hold of us, or for out the goodness of their hearts going, oh, okay, this must be important, let's phone somebody. But nobody's actually legally obliged to report it. But we've had relatively good response rate from reporting the tags. So I think for the most part, they do get reported. Great question.
And then Dina on a similar line says, how do you prevent receiver loss, especially after Gumtree incident?
Thanks, Dina. So yeah, this is quite a tricky question, because a receiver can be lost due to various things. So either when I mentioned the biofouling, what happened before we kind of prevented or accounted for the biofouling was that you could have one barnacle clinging on for dear life, and then you would leave because the receiver wasn't coming to the surface. This receiver would then wash up. So there was nothing you could really do about those things. And then there are a couple of receivers that might find their way back to the surface through boat anchors that have hooked onto them, or even potential fishery, I want to say fishery recapture, but potential, like the octopus fishery in False Bay, they might potentially hook a receiver or something. So yeah, there's nothing that's kind of out of our control. But yeah, again, people generally find it, and we've got numbers written all over it, like a number that you can call, which is generally Paul's number, and people are generally pretty good with responding and phoning and being like, hey, I found something. So yeah, it's a tricky one because it depends how it got lost. But yeah, for the most part, people are also fairly responsive when it comes to that.
But I think what also helps is offering a reward. So people will phone in and say, we found this thing on the beach, whatever, and we say, well, that's great. And we offer a reward, and they're very obviously keen to get the reward, and we get our equipment back. So it works quite well.
Yeah. Oh, and then Enrico, just to answer the earlier question, apologies, I can't remember who it was. Francesca, I think it was you. VR2Ws can be deployed up to 500 meters. So that's great to know.
So I can actually add on to that too. Although those are the specs provided by the manufacturers, I know Nigel Hussey in the Arctic has deployed them down to 800 meters with no problems. I don't know how they retrieved them though, or how it was deployed, but I remember him telling me they deployed receivers down to 800 meters. Do we have any questions? You can go live on a live chat if anybody wants to ask a question.
Craig says, Craig Rennie just say, I'm sorry, I'm just scrolling through the chat. What species have you not yet tagged, but cannot wait to start tagging? Funny enough, for me, mullet. It's like a ridiculous species, but yeah, it's just something that I think we've always wanted to be able to tag, and COVID unfortunately put quite a dampener on that one. So when we can eventually get out there and tagging again, then it'll be good to get some tags in a mullet. Yeah, it's kind of on a wish list as well is some yellowtail, but that's a discussion for another day.
And my favorite one to tag are the electric rays. So I'll provide the tag, but I'm going to ask Taran to hold the fish for me.
Esanati, you say does, thank you, I know that you mentioned tagging happens really close to the coast. Does this limit the depth in which the data can be detected in relation to how deep the fish swims in the ocean? So receivers have detection ranges. So if this is your receiver, then it essentially has an area where it picks up all sorts of detections. And because it's generally at the bottom of the sea or river or anything, you're mostly getting all those detections around. So they generally pick up quite a lot, like, you know, because you're not in huge, you're not in massive depths. And a detection, depending on where it is though, because this can vary quite substantially, let's call it a detection range as a receiver has a detection range of at least roughly 200 meters, but the receivers are never in 200 meters depth. So you're covering that area completely, where it's more the width around the receiver that will be the limiting factor. So your animal should theoretically be detected all the time, whether the receiver is deployed in 80 meters and it's swimming in 5 meters of water, it should be detected.
Judy has asked a tricky question. I said, I saw you had tagged a coelacanth. So I don't know who the you is. How was this done, and were there any detections?
Judy, I think that was one that was tagged quite a while ago, but I think it was tagged with an archival pop-up tag, or I think a satellite tag. Definitely not us with an acoustic tag, which would be quite interesting. But yeah, I think there was some actually quite nice information from it, but the person who would really know more about that is Angus.
No, but I can add that there was acoustic tagging done by Hans Fricker around the Comores. I think with the submersible, they attached it externally, and they did manually track them from the surface and got data. But the one that was tagged off South Africa was a pop-up satellite tag. It was done by a bunch of French guys. We did get data from it. There's still some discussion on what's going to happen with that data and who's going to write it up and who's going to publish it. But yeah, so it has been done, and there is data on South African coelacanths too.
Yeah, I see Ryan Palmer just said that there was a coelacanth tagged with an acoustic tag and tracked manually at Sodwana.
Oh, there you go.
I'm yet to see the data. So if anyone has it, I'd love to see it.
Faith asks, are there some species that are just impossible to tag?
Probably the electric rays Paul just mentioned. I think everything could probably be tagged. So most of the tags that we use are placed internally. So you do a little surgery on the fish and then you pop the tag internally. You can also tag an animal externally. So place it somehow externally on the animal. Like the turtles, you actually glue it to their shell, which is no harm to the turtle. So for the most part, you could probably tag pretty much anything. It's just a way of trying to figure out how to put the tag on it.
Yeah, I think so. And also there are some limitations on capturing animal, if you're going to capture it. So I would say the more difficult ones would probably be things that live in very, very deep waters. So you can't get down to them to tag them, or you can't bring them up to the surface to tag them. And potentially some of the very large, dangerous animals would also be tricky to tag. But for most part, I think we could probably tag just about anything.
Yeah. There's my dad, Roland Murray. Hi, Dad. Says, how can a non-scientist get involved in helping you in any way? I think it's just always good to, for anybody, for scientists, non-scientists, public, whoever, to ask questions and just to find out how you can help, maybe not necessarily with research, but with things like when it comes to fishing, how maybe you can try and work on a change in mindset where perhaps you've caught a fish for many, many generations, but you can encourage your kids or whoever to just have that change in mindset to release a fish and change over to catch and release, as opposed to trying to keep a fish all the time. So I think it's sharing information and I don't know how to put this, just encouraging people to learn something new and to try something new. Judy, what is the mortality rate of tagged fish? Actually, very low, very, very low. I think I can confidently say of the 1,500 fish that have been tagged, I can confidently say that 3 have probably died due to the tagging or an infection that might have occurred from it. And the reason I say that is because it was either, if there's a note on the surgery, like a fish maybe wasn't that strong when it swam away, then it probably shouldn't have been released, or one of the aquarium Learys from Bayworld. There was a Leary that was tagged from Bayworld and was then released, and we never got a detection on it. So I think it also probably succumbed maybe to, environmental differences or something. Maybe it was just like too much to take. So it's actually been very, very low mortality rate. We've had very good successes of tagged animals having 0 response to the tagging or the tagging procedure at all, which is very positive.
Obviously, there's another part of the mortality rate, and that's fishing mortality. Yep. After we've tagged the fish and released them, this is another nice thing. And Taran showed that wonderful example of the little leervis and how many times it was recaptured and ultimately caught. So it's confirmed mortality when the fish got caught and the anglers returned it to us. But if you look at detection data too, particularly for resident fish, and that the tag life goes for 10 years and you stop getting detections after, call it 5 years, you can sort of surmise that the fish has been caught. So give you an estimate of mortality. But we've also got some very, very important information on the mortality rates of juvenile Dusky Cub in estuaries. And we've done several studies, and it's actually quite scary if you compare the mortality rates we're getting from the acoustic tags, and this is return tags, which are also then confirmed by the loss of detections while they were swimming around in the estuary. So you can almost say exactly where the fish was caught, where the detection stopped, and the fish was reported to us. And from our earlier studies, we see that mortality rates in estuaries are something between 55 and 100%. Have been caught by anglers. before they've left their nursery habitat. So we do have very good quantified information on certain species. Ferdy, how long does it take to decipher the data after receivers have been collected?
Depends how quickly you want to look at the information, I suppose. No, Ferdy, in all seriousness, we can look at the information pretty much straight away as soon as it's downloaded. When you're wanting to decipher it, so let's say if you're wanting to put results together or do some analyses on it, you generally have to wait for your study period to come to an end, which in a lot of cases is the end of the battery life. So sometimes you're waiting a couple of years before you are able to really take a look at it, but it doesn't mean that you can't have a look at the data as it comes out. Matt does a wonderful job of providing us with, myself and Paul, with little data reports. So every time he downloads a receiver, we just get a summary of what animal was detected on the receiver and how many detections. So you just kind of keep that in the back of your mind all the time. So yeah, you can pretty much look at it straight away.
Yeah, whales and dolphins are also marine animals. Is it possibly to externally tag cetaceans, or are there ethical issues around the sound emanating from the tag?
I think mammals are probably a whole different ball game. I wouldn't see why you wouldn't be able to externally tag a cetacean. Yeah, I don't see why not, but I'm not actually, I haven't actually ever thought about the sound, how the tag might influence them. Yeah, I don't know. Good question, Wink. Yeah, I don't know. Paul, I don't actually even have an answer for that.
Well, I think the first problem is to get animal ethics clearance to do the tagging. I think that'll be your first hurdle.
Yeah.
And then in terms of interference between the transmitter emissions and the animal, in terms of disturbing its guidance and its own acoustic communication links, there's a lot of debate around this in terms of the frequencies that are transmitted by the tags and what the cetaceans can hear. It's certainly an area that needs a lot more research to find out exactly what impact this noise or potential noise has. But somebody recently did something on the audio potential of a whole bunch of cetaceans, and certain whales and dolphins, our tag frequency 69 kilohertz, do fall within the audible range of some of these cetaceans. So theoretically, there is some disturbance from the acoustic tags on these animals, but it's a field that definitely needs more research attention. Question, is there any tagging being done on river fish within protected areas like the Kruger?
Yeah, there's actually been some radio telemetry work done on tigerfish, and there was something else as well. There's some eel work that's also being done. Yeah, so there is some freshwater stuff that's being undertaken. Well, I say our SAIAB's one of SAIAB's MSc students, Dina, who asked a question just now, was looking at carp movements in groenvlei. So that's also another freshwater project. But there is some tiger fish work being done in some of the Kruger estuaries or something. It's further up. I did read a paper on this and I can't quite remember off the top of my head, but there are some freshwater fish being done, and they are in game park areas. So they are essentially kind of little protected areas. So yes, there is some work being done on that.
Okay, we have one last question here, actually, and a very important question around taking, our science to the people. And the question says, I understand that information is shared with a number of organizations, especially those affected by the red list. Is there any other program you run or plan to run in the future that would bring this kind of information to the people generally that do not have, or not privileged to, or unable to read scientific data and manuscripts, considering the fact that there is little awareness in South Africa in terms of science communication?
Oh, that's a really great question. This science communication is something that I'm actually quite passionate about, and I really try my best to disseminate or to tell people about the work that we're doing. As I mentioned, especially when you're using taxpayers' money, you are accountable. You need to be able to show what you are doing. So, you know, for us as researchers, publishing papers is great. I mean, that is one of the outputs that you are required to do. And I think it makes you feel like you're a real scientist as well when you've got some papers. But it is often, it's not accessible by the public because often you've got to pay for these articles. So yeah, you need to, like I said, I just try my best to tell people about what we do. And if ever a paper comes out and we will be able to publish a paper, I want to be able to create a simple thing like an infographic or a little cartoon or something that shares those results with the public and shows what's being done, like especially stuff with the red listing. You know, we can only take the information so far, and then you've got to you've got to hope that the management authorities kind of take it further. But yeah, I really am quite passionate about sharing information and sharing what I can, because I think it is just a very important and often overlooked area of research. So yeah, if there's any suggestions or any suggestions that you have in how we can improve our science communication, please get hold of me. We're on all the social media platforms. We are contacted by email. Anything, please. I'd really be very interested to chat more about anything, any suggestions that you have.
I think, you know, the social media platforms that you run, Taran, already do expose some of the data, some of the information that is coming in. And then we also occasionally do blogs. So, you know, I think in the Sandcore newsletters, there was a blog series, which seems to have stopped now. But we have been, but possibly need to be more active again in terms of getting some of this information out. And I definitely agree with Judy's last comment there. Taran, science communication for ATAP is brilliant, and we can all share what she produces. So yeah, and I think linking all those social media platforms is the way to go. Thanks, Judy. Okay, I see there are no more questions on the Q&A. If anybody, you can still do a live question if you want to, or any other questions you want to type in. If not, I say thank you very much to Taran. Thanks for a brilliant presentation. I saw some of those photographs and it made me feel rather old. I guess it happens to us when your platform's been running for just over 10 years now.
Yeah.
And then, of course, thank you to all those that participated. I see that we had up to 70 people joining in on this webinar. So that's great to see. So thank you to all of you joining in. And keep an eye out. This, I think, was the fifth of our SAIAB Seminar Series, and there will be more to come. So, yeah, keep an eye out for future talks and presentations by the SAIAB team. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks very much, everyone. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.